Thanks to UCSB for hosting the world in 2050. I also want to say a special thank you to my son Isaac, who helped me to record this because I'm not very familiar with this technology. I won't offer many fancy terms here. I'm going to focus on the practical choices our community has made. I will attach a reading list for those who want to study this some more. Okay, here we go. Our community has learned that education is sometimes about letting go. For example, some concepts that aren't useful anymore: impending climate change, fossil fuels, capitalism. The climate has changed, and it keeps changing. We don't have to wait for that to happen. And unfortunately, 2 decades of violence accomplished what reasonable people had been advising for almost 200 years. Capitalism finally fell apart. The fossil fuel industry disintegrated as quote-unquote civil unrest took over. But you're here, somehow watching this. It's 2050, and I'm here. The community in which I live is here too, limping a little bit, but we're not dying out anytime soon. We voted on who would send this information to you, and I was elected. Yes, we finally live in a direct, locally controlled democracy. We haven't yet found the right word for the system we're creating. I hear a variety of labels for what we are. I'm not sure what system you've got, because I'm not exactly sure who will be watching this, but we want you to know that democracy is working here. When things fell apart, we quickly figured out that unless we wanted those with the loudest voices and the few remaining bullets to tell us what to do, we had to agree on a way to talk in community, how to make decisions in community, and something that would even the odds with those other folks. And yes, we had to deal with the weaponry too, but that's another video. I'm here to talk with you about education, or as some of our more mature community members say, teaching and learning. These activities are the lifeblood of our town. Nothing that we've faced and nothing we can imagine for ourselves can happen without the educational approaches that we have embraced. Here is it's very brief history relevant to our community's approach to education. So very early in the 20th century, people reading Karl Marx began to apply his ideas to educational approaches that they hoped would hurry up socialism's progress. They called for independently run worker schools and schools for children that developed their bodies and their minds. They wanted skills that taught ideas and skills to empower people, not turn them into cogs in a machine. They wanted schools that used truly democratic methods to accomplish their work. This was 1901, 1911, 1918. It's old stuff, forgotten for a while, but not anymore. We've also studied the black schools and colleges established after the U.S. Civil War. They inspired us to do amazing and powerful work, though physical resources might be scarce. They challenged us to examine society with a critical eye. They also taught us how to persevere. And then after the 1950s and the 1960s Red Scare in the U.S., after the fall of various totalitarian regimes around the globe, and with the progress made by socialist societies in Venezuela and Cuba, among others, scholars again began to write about socialist ideas of education. We have read as much of that work as we could find on the remains of the net or in old libraries. In some cases, local scholars owned the books we were looking for, and they shared them with community members. Other educational systems we looked at included Montessori and Waldorf or Steiner schools. They offered theory and method surprisingly similar to ideas promoted by socialist writers. A few of their practitioners actually lived near us, and we talked together as often as we can. And then, in the decades just before capitalism began to disintegrate, parents, teachers, and students fought to get corporate for-profit influence out of U.S. public schools. This last part of history is really where our approach to education was born. Our beginning came from struggle, protest, non-cooperation, and the beginning creation of alternatives to the educational, industrial, military complex. What we wanted, instead of corporate schools, was shaped by the ideas of Paulo Freire and the writers in the American unschooling movement. Okay, so what exactly are we doing? Let me give you a brief sense of what education in our community has become and how we have set it up. Before the old world fell apart, people with vision begged repeatedly that we all stop living as if humans were somehow free to behave, as if they were above or unconnected to the realities of the planet. The presentations, the books, and the protests didn't really persuade until the planet made the argument for us. The challenges posed by the Earth in terms of changed temperatures, altered coastlines, extreme weather, and either too much or not enough water have forced us all to find a way to survive in the new, more difficult, and certainly unfamiliar planetary reality that we brought upon ourselves. The first part of our educational approach focused on the community's survival. Reskilling, some people called it 20 years ago. Repurposing was also one of those big words in certain circles. And these skills, how to grow, prepare, and preserve food, create shelter, create sustainable heating and cooling strategies, address the health needs of our people, as well as produce the objects we needed by repairing and recycling the unbelievable amount of stuff the old society had convinced people to own. These skills we had to learn very quickly. And to make all of this a workload that we could handle, we planned democratically how to get the work done based on interest, ability, and community need. These were tasks kids and adults helped to accomplish. So I guess you could say our first schools were for everybody, though teaching and learning didn't happen in classrooms. We also had caring and dedicated teachers in our community too. They started pushing very early for a children's educational plan. The study of socialist and educational history was combined with descriptions of parents, teachers, and students about early 21st century educational approaches that worked. We took what we thought were the best ideas and we came up with our own design. But this was not a system in which adults dictated what young people were to do. All ages participated in the design that became incredibly varied in approach. Figuring out how we wanted to learn brought us face to face with so many old assumptions that were hard for some people, especially those who had been through or been part of the old school system, to leave behind. The fear that children would not, as people used to say, live up to their potential without adult intervention, that took a long time to die. That was one end of things. At the other extreme were the kids who either hadn't been in school for a long time or had such negative memories of school that they didn't even want to be part of the discussion about education. And then there were the kids and adults who kept wandering into our town after their communities disintegrated. Some of them had been hiding and running so long that they didn't really remember how to work with groups of any kind at all. So there was an extended, pretty chaotic set of years when kids and adults basically did their own thing, coming together only when the solo approach threatened to kill them. But the period wasn't entirely bleak. Good things came out of that chaos, that complexity. Some of those things are still with us. For one thing, our kids play. They are eager to explore their own ideas, and we help them to pursue those. If they choose to study with other kids, it's only with a handful of other students in a home or community center or a small school we can manage to heat and cool. There are lots of teachers. Because teacher creativity is very prized, and we have many people who want to do this work. Just as we have many people who want to serve on the committees that help to organize all of this schooling. The age of specialization has pretty much disappeared, except for a few driven souls who just can't bear to do more than one thing. And that means that teachers combine their days with practical physical tasks, just as we all do. One of the promising cabinet makers I know is all of 14. And I know kids who are 9 or 10 who knit, preserve food, or create software for our ancient patched-up computers. A 17-year-old poet has all our attention these days. We work together and learn from each other all the time. Also, a lot of study happens outside, in woods, along streams, in fields and gardens. Days begin with tasks that keep us alive. Chores, they were once called. After that, people have additional morning time for self-directed learning or small group classes. The afternoons are for personal exploration and experimentation, play, and more community work. Though we haven't had too many kids get this far yet, we imagine that education for those who are 18 to 22, what used to be called college years, we anticipate that it will focus most on relationships with mentors. Larger groups of kids, or kids and adults, do gather a few times a week. What they work on, you guessed it, depends completely on what they see that needs to be done and their own interests. The only large lecture events in our community, and even those always include ample opportunity for discussion, they focus on topics that require immediate community attention, such as where to establish a new vegetable field when the one by the creek continues to flood, or that reflect an interest we would all like to better understand. Right now we have a pretty large group reading Istvan Meszaros and John Bellamy Foster. We have a large band that plays and is learning how to repair and build instruments. A third group is doing writing together. And perhaps the largest group devotes its time to soccer and baseball depending on the season. Okay, if I had to single out a few subjects that our community has focused on since the world changed, they would be the following. First of all, environmental studies and ecology. That would be first on the list. Why? Because if we hadn't improved our understanding of Earth's systems and worked together to anticipate what the changed planet would likely force us to endure, we knew we had less chance of staying alive. It wasn't so much that we wanted to save the local toad, though we learned fast that paying attention to the health of amphibians could provide early warnings to us about environmental toxins likely to hurt us as well. But we wanted to find the connections. We wanted to develop a better sense of how to live in balance with this new Earth of ours. In our town, we don't think of species as existing on some sort of hierarchical developmental ladder with humans at the top. We have been forced to understand that the interconnections between different species are far more complex than we ever appreciated. Second, history. This is a huge interest in our community, partly because capitalism hated history. It tried to banish history that looked at all the players in a society with equal interest and respect. So, we've been, as some understand it, reclaiming our histories and our her stories, and the knowledge of indigenous peoples, the black and brown stories, the stories of people capitalism disenfranchised, dispossessed, and marginalized, and creating a history of the capitalist period that admires its ability to produce, even as we study the system's inability to self-regulate. We also study those very old and not so old societies that were socialist, communalist, or communist in focus, because we have experienced that history changes, in our case dramatically. We recognize that our understanding of what has been affects how we choose to live today, which in turn will affect how those in the future will live. Sorry about the obvious break in the recording here. It started to rain and I had clothes on the line. Always loved the rain, but didn't want a soggy mess either. Okay, so where was I? Oh yeah, number 3. I don't really know what to call this last topic, but I know the study of how to organize, how to design our groups and projects so that our democratic approach informs everything we set out to do as a community is part of every day in our town. Those with activist experience or progressive political backgrounds have helped with this work, some of which happens in the midst of trying to get a project on its way, and some of which happens in small group interactions. Though formal universities are not possible right now, our town was home to several such institutions, and many of those professors continue to live here. Their research skills and their knowledge of many kinds of systems have offered valuable contributions to the work we do. That's a tricky collaboration, though, as our community no longer supports professionals who are paid for their expertise. We don't have a system that defers to the opinions of experts. The professors' perspectives are valuable, and they are part of the decision-making process. As always, it's a balancing act. And as we learn of more and more communities that are managing to survive, the balancing act gets more complicated. We recognize that the way we are doing things here may not be the same as their ways, and yet we need to find a way to collaborate with them, at least from time to time. And I think I have to end this here. I think there was a time limit. I hope you get a sense of the studying, teaching, learning, and practicing that inform our lives every day. Okay, I can't go quite yet. Here are a few ideas that we want to send your way. Hang on to all your books and research materials. Figure out how to catalog them. Figure out how many working computers you have and how or when you can connect with what's left of the net. Once you know what resources you have, make sure they are stored in shelters that are dry and stay relatively constant in temperature. Develop lists of people who share knowledge and skills relevant for certain topics. Spend time talking with each other about what people want to learn, too. And then find ways to make all this information available to everyone in town. You just never know what you're going to need, and you never know where the next great idea will come from. And one last thing. Learn to tolerate a fair amount of disorder. Just go with it. And this is from Sandra Lidberg. I am living in what some still call Bloomington, Illinois.